So this is the sheet where I've put down a summary of the things that we looked at last week. So last week we went through each of the workshops that we'd done in fashion, and we identified how or whether the work would fit into one of the four grading criteria for Unit 4. So we've got P1, P2, P3 and P4, and that's what we were slotting our work into. I've taken our sheet from last week and I've added some detail to try and make it a bit clearer. So for each of the things that we said would work for Unit 4, I've put it into the right box. So I've put it into either P1, an artist, P2, artist, P3, samples, or P4, health and safety. I've put a colour code on them. So red, if you look at the top, is about questions to ask yourself when annotating. So this is to give you some guidance about the kind of things that you might want to write about your artists. Green is a reminder of which PowerPoint supports this work on Moodle. So if this was maybe a week that you missed or something that you feel like you've not got all the parts for, you need a bit of a recap, you can go and have a look at the PowerPoint on Moodle and this tells you the right one to look at. Blue is about samples, so it highlights the samples that you've produced and any more samples that you might want to produce. So let's have a look at it. So P1 has got an artist in it, and this is where we need to say how they've used materials, techniques and processes. P2 is looking at the exact same artist, but it's saying how they've used those materials, techniques and processes to communicate their ideas, their creative intentions. And so sometimes we've already looked at those artists, we looked at them in the PowerPoint in the session, sometimes we didn't. And so where we haven't, I've added in a suggested artist that I'd like you to have a look at. So for the first one, when we looked at lock stitch and making a plain seam, we didn't have an artist for that. So I've put Lisa Cockin in there, an image of her work. She does loads of work where she takes photographs and stitches them together. So I've asked questions like what materials has she used, how has she joined them, what problems might she have with stitching paper, how does the work differ from when she works with fabric. They're all about how she's used materials, techniques and processes. We then need to ask a second set of questions which are about how she communicated her creative intentions and how that links to those materials, techniques and processes. So our questions here are things like, why does she use stitch and not a different technique? Why do you think that she's made the choices that she has? Why do you think she's stitched by hand and not by machine? How might the work have looked if she'd used it on a machine? I've also then added in things that you might want to think about. So I've asked you about how it might differ if we work on a machine or by hand. What things might happen? One of the things is the machine needle might tear the paper rather than just making holes in it. It might tear it. So I've put in blue there, why not try stitching a plain seam on some photos or paper? What happens? Do it on a machine, do it by hand, include it in your file. This is a kind of extra sample where it shows that you've engaged with your research and thought about it and tried out some of the things that you've spoken about. This is where we're going to be aiming for those higher grades for merits and distinctions, because it shows that we've tried things out and we've not just written about an artist, but we've actually thought about it and seen how it would work. A lot of the questions you'll see aren't just past questions, they're things that are in that evaluate section. They're asking you to form judgments, they're asking you to do higher level thinking. And so I've purposefully given you questions that are higher level so that we're not just aiming for a pass, we can all do so much better than that. Let's aim for merits and distinctions. Okay? In your samples, it's got the samples highlighted in blue for each of the techniques each week, and it's also got on it where you need to do process notes. So they're part of the sample because they explain why you've done it and they allow you to evaluate whether it worked or not. We've also got health and safety. We don't need to repeat this each time. So if we're doing health and safety for sharps, so using scissors and needles for example, we only need to do it the first time we use it on a technique. So I've highlighted the first time we've used a different health and safety consideration or a different piece of equipment and highlighted what that is as a reminder for you. I've also put in some photographs, so if we've got an artist that we've not used before, I've put a photograph in of their work, or I've put examples in of when we need to develop our work. So when we did the wire work, for example, you made the basic rouleau loop, you stuffed it with wire, and then we had to make shapes on the body. If you didn't get round to that, make your shapes and actually put them on your own body and photograph them. It's about showing that you've engaged with the work and thought about how it can work for jewellery. You might then do some sketches of ideas for jewellery. So I've put a photograph here as an example. You might say, this is what it looked like when I put my rouleau loops on the body. If I'd made 20 more of these, I could have created this effect. And so instead of creating 20 more, you can do a sketch or a drawing or a design that shows what you mean. The more you can push your ideas and develop them, the better grade we're going to get. Okay, so I'm going to pop this sheet onto our chat so that you've all got a copy of it, and you can start to hopefully work through those, fill in the gaps, and maybe if you've already done some artist research, you might have a look at some of the questions that I've asked and answer those to make sure your work's more detailed.